Hi there.
Hi, Dana. Free at last.
Ha,
Are you sitting on the floor, Ruth?
I am. I'm sitting on, not just sitting on the floor, but sitting on the floor of my closet.
Oh.
I'm going to go get my coffee. I'll be right back.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, and today we've got an episode that's going to feel a little different because we're doing it on the fly. A jury just found Donald Trump guilty of criminal fraud, making history as the first former president to be convicted of a felony. I'm Karen Tumulty, a columnist here at the Post, and I've got two of my colleagues here with me, Ruth Marcus and Dana Milbank, to process this moment. So welcome, guys.
It's great to be with you, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
So this all just happened. Let's just start by giving me your first impressions. Ruth, you're the only one of us who has a law degree. What do you think?
Well, I have not been a fan of this prosecution from the start, and I found myself incredibly, first of all, relieved at the verdict, at the breadth of the verdict, that it came back quickly, that it came back unanimously, obviously, that it came back not in a split way, but all 34 counts. I was braced for a mix, which still would have been devastating to the former president. And I am not just relieved, but really pleased that the system worked so that 12, I was just listening to the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, 12 everyday people who served on the jury took the evidence seriously and reached what I think is a very fair verdict.
So, Dana, though, Ruth and I have both been at a disadvantage because there were no cameras in that courtroom, which meant we've both been kind of at the mercy of hearing what other people say about what was happening in the courtroom. You saw much of this trial. Were you surprised?
I did see some of this trial, and I would say you were at an advantage not being in the courtroom. It was really an oppressive environment. But, look, just talking to the people who were there at the courthouse, the reporters covering it, everybody assumed that an acquittal was sort of out of the question. But I think the smart money was actually saying that it probably would be a hung jury. I think there was a lot of sense that there was some sympathy for Trump's argument, and just as much for the parade of Republican officials. People reading the tea leaves there, I think, were looking in that direction.
Well, Dana was saying that the smart money, such as it was, turned out to be not that smart, was on a hung jury. I hang out and hung out a lot over Memorial Day weekend with a lot of lawyers, and they were not lawyers inclined in any way to Donald J. Trump, and all of them predicted with somewhat smug certainty a hung jury. I was kind of 60-40 on conviction because I thought the evidence was very strong. I thought the lawyering was much stronger on the prosecution side than on the defense side, especially the closing arguments. I thought the facts were strong. And I thought, look, let's be clear, it was not rigged, but this is a Manhattan jury, and they were going to not be inclined to rule for Trump. And so I did think that there was a very significant possibility of a hung jury. I think that would have been also a legitimate outcome. I'm very glad we have this conviction instead.
Well, my frame of reference for how a Manhattan jury operates comes from having watched 12 Angry Men about 20 times. So I was expecting a little more drama, and I was expecting for it to take longer. This, to me, given that there were 34 counts that they had to go through, seems surprisingly fast.
Can I say something about that?
Please.
I don't think it's fair to say that the jury did this in a hurried up way. My money was actually on Friday afternoon because in my experience, nothing concentrates a jury's mind like Friday afternoon coming and the prospect of having to go back to work on Monday. But that said, either they were going to do one of, I think, three things. They were going to convict on all counts, they were going to hang on everything, or they were going to convict on the 9 counts involving the checks that Donald Trump himself signed. But you didn't have to go through the complications of count by count, because either you agreed that all of them were fair and proven, or 9 of them were fair and proven. But I was surprised it was today, but I am not surprised it didn't take an incredibly long time to get to a conviction.
And it was nearly 2 full days of deliberation. And I do, once again, have to point out that spending 1 minute in that courthouse is an hour in real time off of your life.
Well, I'm talking to people with the Trump campaign last week. I do know that they themselves were increasingly pessimistic after they saw the judge's instructions. And, Trump himself, when he came out of the courthouse and gave that rant about how even Mother Teresa couldn't have gotten off of these charges, he clearly didn't think this was going to end well for him.
Yeah, the sign for me was when the Trump campaign put out a press release having inside it something they called a confidential memo, which isn't very confidential if you put it out as a press release from the campaign pollsters yesterday, saying basically, it's all baked in the cake. Doesn't matter what happens. If he's convicted, doesn't matter, and if he's totally acquitted, not going to change any voters' minds. So obviously, you don't send that out if you are expecting to be acquitted and to make hay from it. So I think they were pretty sure where it was going.
The thing about the Trump campaign, though, is that they can make hay no matter what happens. And one of the first things that happened after this verdict was announced was that the campaign fundraising website crashed. I don't know if that was because of some technical glitch or just because they were being flooded with money. But I mean, their strategy, I think, here is pretty clear, which is, no matter how this came out, they were going to attack the judge, they were going to attack the prosecutor, they were going to attack the process, and they're going to, claim that President Biden was behind all of it. And even, there already has been TV footage of Trump kind of walking the blocks of Manhattan, raising his fist. So, this is an operation that made money off his mugshot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Karen, can we turn the tables on you and ask you what you think the political fallout is going to be here?
It's interesting because both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign have told me that this doesn't really change the trajectory of a very close election all that much. And certainly even the campaign put out a statement saying this election is going to be decided at the ballot box and not in a courthouse. But, let's face it, a close election that is likely to be decided by fewer than 100,000 voters in 3 to 7 states, even a few votes moving matters. The real frustration on the part of the Biden campaign has been that while this trial was underway, they were completely unable to break through the wall-to-wall coverage, which is why they pulled that kind of silly stunt of sending Robert De Niro down to the courthouse the other day. It was like, well, we'll just have to send our message down there because we can't get it through. And yesterday, even as the jury was deliberating, the major cable channels wouldn't break to cover President Biden launching a big outreach effort to Black voters in Philadelphia. They would rather stay on, a bunch of talking heads and a clock. So in some ways, I think, the Biden campaign as well is, they're not spiking the ball on this verdict, but I think they're very happy that this trial is over. And by the way, we're just 4 weeks away from the debate.
I wonder if and I know that it's the view of the Biden campaign that this is not going to be a huge game changer, and huge is probably the wrong and very Trumpy word to use here. But I do
Only if you pronounce it huge, but yes.
huge. But I do wonder if, in fact, we haven't really internalized the impact of the new reality here, which is that we have a former president of the United States, the soon to be 4 days after his sentencing, Republican presidential nominee, convicted of 34 felony counts. And there is a group of Trump adjacent, Trump curious, Trump, but potentially Trump disgusted voters who I think are going to be taken aback by this and turned off by it. And that the reality of it happening hasn't really sunk into people yet. I mean, obviously, it hasn't sunk into people yet because it just happened today. But in some sense, the reality of him having been on trial hasn't really sunk into people because of the sad fact that it was only Dana Milbank and a few hardy, lucky few who got to actually be in court and hear the evidence. But I do think we may be understating the potential, and even the Biden campaign may be understating the potential impact of this conviction.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. I mean, look, we have no idea. Anybody who says they know what the impact is going to be is lying about this, because we've never had a convicted felon running for president on at the top of a major party ticket before. So, I think it should be obvious that, given the choice, would you rather run for president as a normal citizen or as a convicted felon? Oh, I think you would probably go with option A. I think that's what I would do. But even if we accept, sort of the conventional wisdom now that this, moves the needle at the margin, which by itself could be significant, it has already affected the campaign, I think, in a very important way. And that is, it's been this huge distraction for the Trump campaign and for the candidate himself. You point out, Karen, that the Biden folks have had trouble breaking through all the news chatter. What they have been doing during this time is doing what you're supposed to be doing in the spring of an election year, and building a really strong election infrastructure in the battleground states. And I really don't get the sense that Trump and the RNC have been doing what they need to be doing and are just sort of swept up in the media circus. So I think that's a way in which it has affected the campaign already, and will continue to. I mean, now we're looking at sentencing, 3 or 4 days before the Republican convention is supposed to begin in July.
And do you think we're ever going to hear from any of these jurors? I mean, given how brutal the environment is out there, I certainly wouldn't want to raise my hand or go public. But I mean, I'm just dying to hear what the process was like in the jury room.
Yeah, I think the bigger question is, are they going to be outed? I think that's the more ominous thing, and made targets of, because, I mean, there are ways to identify them, and, this sort of thing can be done. When we were thinking that it would be the hung jury situation, then I thought there might be some pro-Trump patriot who would come out there and, become a national celebrity based on it. But, after this outcome, I'm not sure you'd want to stand up there and say, it was me.
Right.
Yeah, if you went home to your wife or husband and said, I'm thinking about speaking out and talking about my view of the evidence, I think your spouse would say, that seems like a very bad idea for you and our family.
Well, we'll talk a little more about the importance or not of this trial. But first, we have to take a quick break. Welcome back. I'm Karen Tumulty, and this is an impromptu episode of Impromptu, as we're processing the news that Donald Trump has been convicted in a New York court on all 34 felony counts. So let's talk a little bit more about the significance of this trial. It is likely to be, of all the charges against Donald Trump, the only one that we're going to see a verdict before the election. And a lot of people had cast doubt on the idea of even bringing this trial. Some people called it the runt of the litter. You, Ruth, too, as you had mentioned earlier, were not such a fan of this prosecution. Could you talk a little bit more about how your own thinking changed over the course of the trial?
Well, I have been a doubt caster, but I want to put this trial in a larger context. And I think this is a potential argument that the Biden campaign could be making, which is it was unfortunate from my point of view that the weakest and to some extent the least significant of these cases was the first, and now it appears the only one to go to trial before the election. If the process had been allowed to play out in a way that was fairer, Donald Trump would not be a once convicted felon in New York state court. He would be, by the time of the election, in all likelihood, a thrice convicted felon, convicted in Florida federal court of obstructing justice and mishandling classified documents, convicted in D.C. district court of attempting to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power in the 2020 election. And it is only because, and this is the argument that I would make, of the complicity and fecklessness of Judge Eileen Cannon, Trump appointee in the Mar-a-Lago case, and because of the, to some extent, complicity and, if not fecklessness, undue delay of the Supreme Court in handling the immunity case that they still have not decided and probably won't decide for another maybe 4 weeks now, that we are not getting these trials before the election. So this is the one that we were left with. It was, I thought, the weakest case legally because of some really boring complexities of New York state law that I could give a learned disquisition on, but probably would spare the podcast listeners from doing that. But that doesn't mean that the underlying facts were not really disturbing. I'm not that worked up about the argument that he falsified business records after voters voted that no one was ever going to see, no one was going to ever rely on. But I am worked up by the fundamental fact that he, in league with Michael Cohen and others, conspired to keep salient, important, and potentially decisive information from voters in the form of covering up his relationship, such as it was with Stormy Daniels. He paid her off to keep her quiet. He did that precisely at the time when he was most politically exposed because of the Post reporting about the Access Hollywood tape. Voters did not have the information that they should have had to decide whether he was fit to be president in 2016. And that was really bad and corrupt conduct. So the fact that we kind of shoehorned it into a New York false business records case may be kind of legally disturbing, but it's not morally disturbing.
And Dana, you got to watch Trump's legal team over the course of this. How good were they?
Well, I am not a lawyer, so I would leave those finer points to Ruth. But it definitely got the sense that they, like everybody else in Trump's orbit, were playing, not to the jury, but to their client. There was this obsession with denying the Stormy Daniels affair. In fact, arguably, it was their insistence on denying the Stormy Daniels affair in their opening arguments that made it possible for all of the Stormy Daniels testimony, which really wasn't terribly central to the case, but was terribly salacious and cringe-inducing. I think they were playing for their client. I think they were trying to set up an appeal, from the very beginning, or just at least being prepared to do that. But, to the point that Ruth was talking about earlier, I think all of the reaction you're seeing from, Republican congressional leaders, and of course the Trump campaign after this, it's predictable. The rigged justice system, and the truth is, there has been some evidence coming out that the justice system has been rigged, and it has been rigged in favor of Donald Trump for the reasons Ruth laid out in terms of the postponement of these trials. And it just, to me, it's very funny to be talking about complaining about the rigged American justice system, even as Justice Alito is flying insurrection flags at his house, and
that was his wife,
and just Mrs.
He had
or
nothing
as
to
he
do
refers
with
to her, Mrs. Alito.
Right. He is not fond of flying flags, as he told
right?
us.
No, I'm not fond of flags. But what is at the top of this rigged justice system? A 6-3 pro-Trump Supreme Court. How rigged can this justice system be? So I agree. This was, the weakest of the four cases against Trump in terms of its importance. But the truth is, it turned out to be essential because it is the only one, the only moment that in which he is going to face justice before the election.
Karen, can I weigh in with a technical legal term about the Trump defense team?
Sure.
I thought they sucked.
Okay.
Now, they may have sucked for the reason that Dana suggested, which was that they were acting at the behest and instruction of their client, who told them to deny, which is what Trump always does. But juries are people too. And you know what? None of us like being taken for fools. And everybody understood, who had been paying the scantest amount of attention, and this jury was paying a lot of attention, that Trump and Stormy Daniels had a sexual encounter, that Trump paid her off, that he knew he paid her off, that he did it in order to affect the election. In a different world, in a legal team that had been freer to do this, they would not have made completely contradictory arguments, such as it was a reimbursement. It wasn't a reimbursement. It was a retainer. And he stole money from us out of the retainer. Those two things can't be simultaneously true. A better legal team would have acknowledged all of this and concentrated on the weakest piece and the most factually, potentially vulnerable piece of the prosecution's case, which is, yes, it's all true. Our client did all of this, but here's the thing. He didn't know they were going to falsify the business records. He wasn't really paying attention while he signed these 9 checks. The other stuff happened without his attention. And even if he knew that the business records were false, he did not do it with the requisite intent to commit another crime. And where's the proof that he understood that he was committing whatever other crime you jurors decide that he was committing, whether it was a federal election law violation or a tax violation or filing other false business records? And so I would have really concentrated my attention on that and hoped that I could get 1 or 2 people to hang the jury on that thing. But that was not the horse they either chose or were allowed to choose. And I have one more thing to say about this defense team now that I have the floor, which is
right.
Todd Blanche did a really outrageous thing, and as the judge said to him, it can't have been accidental, when he raised the prospect of Trump being sent to prison. That was really serious attorney misconduct, and the judge was infuriated. The jury was instructed. It did not dissuade them, but Blanche knew exactly what he was doing, and that is just extremely unacceptable, intolerable conduct on his part. I feel much better having said all of that, by the way.
Yeah, no, I feel better too. And in fact, it reminds me of a bit of a conspiracy theory I was hearing around the courthouse. And really, the strategy was to prepare Trump so that he could appeal based on not having competent representation in the trial. So, who knows? We're all conspiracy theorists these days. That it might have been a brilliant plan.
That's a little bit of a high bar. Make that argument.
I think on that, I should thank you both for joining me for this truly impromptu conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you, Karen. See you guys.
Let's do it again sometime.
Next trial.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Demir Marusik, Chris Sulentrop and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Chris Rucan designed our art, and special thanks to Millie Mitra, Nick Safin, Renita Jablonski, and David Shipley. Find Impromptu wherever you get your podcast and press that follow button so you don't miss any surprise episodes like this one.